You know, every single day we're surrounded by groundbreaking research and just brilliant new ideas. But what if I told you that most of that knowledge, it never actually gets used? Today we're diving into this massive gap between the world of research and the real world, and we're going to talk about how we can turn all that incredible knowledge into actual, tangible impact.
This quote, wow, it just gets right to the heart of the problem, doesn't it? For decades, there's been this feeling that there are two totally separate worlds. You've got the academics, who are all about theoretical rigor, and then you have the practitioners, the managers, the creators, the people on the ground, who just need practical solutions that work right now. And the result? A whole lot of genius ideas end up trapped in academic journals, never making that leap to where they could do the most good.
And this issue, it actually has a name, the Great Knowledge Divide. And it's not just some small gap, it's a full-on chasm, and it has some really serious consequences. This leads us to a really powerful metaphor. Research debris. Just imagine old satellites and rocket parts floating uselessly up in orbit. Well, in the exact same way, academic research that doesn't get applied just stays stuck in this kind of intellectual orbit, never having any real impact. It becomes this massive, fragmented body of knowledge that's just floating out there.
So why does this happen? Well, it's because academics and practitioners are basically living in different thought worlds. Academics get rewarded for theoretical rigor. That's their currency. But practitioners? They need relevant solutions for today's problems. Their incentives are completely misaligned. The slow, careful, publish-or-perish world of academia just clashes with the lightning speed of the real world. You throw in a bunch of technical jargon and a process that usually shuts practitioners out, and yeah, you get a massive divide.
Okay, so that's the big problem. The crucial question then is, how do we stop all this valuable knowledge from turning into debris? To find an answer, let's zoom in and look at one specific academic concept and see what happens when it actually gets applied in the real world.
All right, let's dive into a really cool case study on a powerful idea, leading when there's no leader.
The academic term for this is self-leadership. But really, all it means is how you influence yourself, how you manage your own goals, your mindset, and your motivation. And in today's economy, where so many of us are working without a traditional boss, well, this idea is more relevant than ever.
So let's actually put this theory to the test. We're going to see how this whole concept of self-leadership plays out for two very modern types of workers: gig workers and content creators. First up, the gig worker. And yeah, we're talking about folks like rideshare drivers who aren't managed by a person, but by an algorithm. For them, self-leadership isn't really a choice, it's an absolute necessity. But this is where a fascinating paradox shows up.
It turns out that for rideshare drivers, self-leadership is a total double-edged sword. When their job satisfaction is high, it acts like a resource gain. It actually boosts their well-being and sense of control. But when they're under high financial stress, it flips and becomes a resource drain. The constant pressure to self-manage becomes exhausting, and it can literally push them to look for more traditional, stable jobs. So the very same skill has the complete opposite effect depending on the context. How wild is that? Okay, now let's pivot to our second case, the content creator. Think YouTubers, TikTokers. These are entrepreneurs who are basically their own CEO. So how does self-leadership help them innovate and stay motivated day after day?
Well, the research shows that successful creators use three key strategies. First is constructive thought. That's the mental game, right? It's the ability to see a video that flopped not as a failure, but as a learning experience. Then there's behavioral focus. This is the discipline to set goals, to actually track your analytics, and stick to a plan. And finally, you've got natural reward. And that's all about finding motivation in the pure joy of the creative process itself, especially when the views are down.
But here's a super interesting twist. It turns out the platform itself completely changes which strategy matters most. On really constrained platforms, like TikTok with its short video formats, that mental game of constructive thought has a much, much stronger impact on innovation. But on platforms with more flexibility, it's actually less critical. So the work environment itself literally shapes what strategies work.
Okay, so let's just pause and zoom back out for a second. We've just seen how a supposedly abstract academic idea has very real, very nuanced effects out in the wild. This proves it's not debris, right? So now let's figure out how we can make this kind of connection happen way more often.
So we've seen that these academic ideas can have a real impact. The big question now is, how do we build a bridge to make that connection happen systematically, not just by some lucky accident?
The source material proposes a solution that is, honestly, brilliantly simple but so powerful. It all starts by reframing one small part of every single academic paper, the limitations section. Just look at the difference here. The traditional version is super passive. It basically says, hey, someone else should probably figure out how to use this. But the reimagined Pathways to Impact section, it's active. It forces the researcher to ask, how do I stop my own work from becoming debris, and then suggests concrete next steps, like partnering directly with organizations or working with research brokers who specialize in translating these findings.
Now you might be thinking, okay, it's just changing a few sentences in a paper. But this small change would be absolutely profound. It would make relevance a core part of the research itself, not just some afterthought. The focus would shift from only critiquing a study's methods to critiquing the entire system that keeps knowledge locked away. It turns a passive final paragraph into a powerful, built-in call to action.
So we'll end with this question for you. Think about your own work, your industry, your passions. What valuable ideas, what knowledge debris is just floating around out there, waiting to be used? And more importantly, what's one small step you could take to create a pathway for that knowledge to make a real, tangible impact? Thanks so much for tuning in.